Good evening. My name is Dr. Anushka Bailey, and I will be presenting my paper, Dust, Animacies and Distributions, the Tradition of Dance and Its Relation to Contemporary Society. My affiliation is as Chair of the Arts and Creativities Research Group, Director of the Arts, Creativities and Education Master's Programme at Cambridge University in the Faculty of Education. Since 2020, the world has changed. It's hard to imagine any person not touched by the pandemic in some way. For many of us, the past 2 years or more in fact, has taken its toll, not just on the way social and financial markets have moved, how numbers have danced on stock market screens, and how statistics of life and death, health and healing have risen and fallen like a terrible dust storm across tablets and screens of governments, businesses, and in our own homes on mobile and laptop screens. But the pandemic has also taken its toll on our living, breathing bodies. During lockdowns, we move inside. We move behind closed doors or move precious little at all. And the body and how we inhabit and enact spaces has changed. Meanwhile, during such lockdowns, animal bodies moved more, leaping and dancing and reclaiming the streets and skies in a rush of abandon. What is this politics of movement then, this ontology of motion that grabs all life across the planet, from the smallest atoms to the wildest and largest of phenomena, in an unceasing dance of material distributions? What happens if we disrupt the long-held Enlightenment divide between human and non-human modes of materiality and place our critical and practice-based frames around movement itself, the endless dance of matter and materiality, matter and meaning? What do we get to do if we start to do this, to think like this, to move like this? I argue that we get to participate in new flows of contemporary life more fully. And these flows include, but are not limited to, the impact of digital, VR, AR, and AI on the world in 2022 and beyond. As scholar Stacey Alamo states, quote, "If nature is to matter, we need more potent, more complex understandings of materiality." Side by side, Karen Barad's critique of the linguistic term and William's appraisal of the word environment suggest a troubling parallel between the immateriality of contemporary social theory and a widespread popular disregard for non-human nature. End quote. So, thinking otherwise about movement and performativity has perhaps never been more vital, more urgent, and more a sign of the times that we live in. How do we reconcile the so-called borders and boundaries between analog, fleshly modes of living and digital modes? What happens if we shift the boundaries between digital and analog and examine instead the idea of a continuous movement, dance indeed, of matter, as a way to engage with the vast sense of change shifting through the world in post-2022 times? Thinking otherwise, experimenting otherwise, strategizing otherwise in an era of cataclysmic risk and bizarre and re-territorializations, not just of space and spatiality, but of how spaces are animacies of future nows, has perhaps never been more important or more necessary. What the increase in digital life over these pandemic years has taught us, arguably more than anything, especially those of us who are engaged in the teaching and performing of dance and theatre, is that space is no longer what it was in more classic humanist times, and certainly less digital times. Space is no longer a container. Now I zoom in at different times, and I'm sitting inside someone's bedroom or kitchen via their handheld device 9,000 miles away, or giving a lecture in my study in Cambridge to a host of people in Shanghai. Time and space have folded, and they are no longer the same. So what I would invite this audience here and now to think about is how space and time are now perhaps more understandable, more recognizable, and more commensurate with daily experience as a distribution of space-times that are distributed and constantly in motion. Why is it important to recognize this? Because the world isn't the same. It never was. It has always been more than one. Many worlds packed inside one another, dancing in difference. This brings us to the idea of tradition and the traditional of contemporary performance. What is the definition of tradition? If in a digital age we are indeed a multitude of distributive agencies, more than just our bodies alone, then how does such a multitude move traditionally? Again, it is the idea of distribution that comes to challenge our assumptions about what tradition is. A practice. Is it a way of doing? A way of doing with a host of power relations packed inside it? Tradition also suggests a boundary and a border, and the movement of atoms, the atomic dances and fizzes that whirl inside our bodies as our bodies. These are configurations. Material configurations of self, community, society, technology that exist in distribution. Or more specifically, they exist as distribution, a distributive form of agency and intelligence. They are animacies, lively and alive across the terrains of body, technology, space-time, and everything we thought we knew about just being alive, here, now. So tradition becomes a way to make sense of these distributions. But the thing with sense-making is that it has to be open to change. It has to remain lively and relevant, I argue. The same is true of other kinds of tradition. As Mel E. Chen states, quote, using animacy as a central construct rather than, say, life or liveliness, though these remain a critical part, helps us to theorize current anxieties around the production of humanness in contemporary times. Animacy activates new theoretical formations that trouble and undo stubborn binary systems of difference, including dynamism, stasis, life, death, subject, object, speech, non-speech, human, animal, natural body, cyborg body. In its more sensitive figurations, animacy has the capacity to rewrite conditions of intimacy, engendering different kinds of communalisms and revising biopolitical spheres, or at least how we might theorize them. Distribution comes to change the way we move in the world, right now, today. So how do we cope with this? How do we think? How do we dance differently this time? If we take the idea of distribution seriously, then we will need to examine the movements that live and animate more than just our own bodies. We need to turn to the non-human, the more than human, the animate world that dances with us, before us, and through us. So I propose a few questions for us to take with us as we move through the rest of our evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are right now. What can we learn from non-human animacies? That's the first question. How do other animacies move? What might we learn from examining the movement of phenomena and materials through the lens of distribution? What social imaginings become possible when we do so? What possible futures emerge as part of this? So such questions, they're all very well and good, but how about an example? This is a short excerpt from a dance and digital art company who I believe are doing wonderful work in the critical practice of imagining how dance can help us create urgent strategies for understanding and working with notions of digital practice, distribution, animacy, and movement in contemporary society, challenging what we think audiences are, what we think the world is, and how this all moves. I would like to invite us all to watch this 1-minute clip together, which I'll cue up for you in a moment, to challenge what we already know of dance from the perspective of digitality, distribution, and dust, creating new, lively ways of thinking, being, doing, and dancing in the world. Let me find this clip for you.
Everything that is was formed from dust. The sun, planets, our earth, our bodies. How to become a dust particle again, and what it would be like to see the world from a different perspective.
Often, when I watch dance, I have the desire to be really close up, to float around, invisible. And virtual reality has given us the opportunity to experience it. We created our own set of tools and made the volumetric recordings of the dancers to be able to immerse the people right next to them and look at the performance from any point of view.
We wanted the audience to feel like there are dust particles floating in the immediate presence of the dancers. They can even step inside them.
Inspired by these eternal particles, which were part of our bodies for an incredibly short moment, we wanted to reimagine our perception of a body, of space, and of time.
Thank you so much.